It's time to experience the O on the original Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Mark Maradei.
My guest this week on the Original Sports Podcast with Mark Maradei was born and raised in Erie, PA, with a love and passion for football. As a young guy, his uncle, and I mean brainwash, tried to brainwash the poor guy into being a Dallas Cowboy fan. Nobody needs to be a Dallas Cowboy fan who lives in Steeler country. Let me just say that. He'd put him in front of the TV, he'd make him watch the Cowboys of the 90s. That is pure torture in my eyes. But he finally was able to escape that and follow in his grandfather's footsteps, and he became a Steeler fan. Tommy Jaggi is covers the NFL. He's been covering it since 2014 for a number of online publications, including Sports Illustrated, Steel City Underground, SB Nation. He currently is a full-time editor for FanSided, who covers the Steelers for Steel Curtain and for NFL Draft with the first pick. We're going to talk with Tommy today about his impressions of the 2021 season, the free agency that's going on right now. We'll talk about draft targets, which will be coming up very shortly. The pending quarterback situation and his thoughts on it. And we're also going to do our We Just Gotta Know segment. And we're going to ask Tommy who he thinks the 5 most important players are for the Pittsburgh Steelers going forward. So, Tommy, how's life treating you, my friend?
It is excellent. Thanks for having me on today.
Pronounce that last name again for me. I think I might have butchered it just a little bit.
Sure, that's all right. You're not the first. It's called Jaggi.
Jaggi, okay. Almost like jag off, like they would say in Pittsburgh. Am I correct?
Like I've been called numerous times, correct.
Hey, man, talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit more about you. I know you were trying to be brainwashed into being a Cowboy fan, but you saw the light. Tell us a little bit more about you. Were you an athlete growing up?
That's right. Yes, my uncle, we used to sit down and we would watch old videotapes of Cowboy games with my cousins. And so I was able to escape that. A few years later, became a Steelers fan around the age of 10. So I was pretty young still, pretty new to football. I was an athlete growing up. I played football up till middle school. And then through high school, I was actually a tennis and basketball player.
Oh, excellent. Favorite sport, though, football, hands down. No question about it.
Absolutely. No question.
Aspirations of being in the NFL like every little kid?
Yeah, like always, like everybody.
All-time favorite Steeler?
Troy Polamalu.
Yeah. He's quite a character.
It's an easy one to like.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, what's your impressions of what went on with the Steelers last year? I know we're a little bit down the road from that, but they've lost some players due to free agency. Did they address what they needed to last year to be the team that they could have been? What are your thoughts on 2021?
The 2021 season did not really go as Steelers fans envisioned. We were able to sneak into the playoffs, and I think that just looking at the roster on paper last year, I think that a lot of fans probably would have been satisfied with a 9-7-1 record, but obviously nobody likes to get spanked in the playoffs the way that we did in the wild card round of the Chiefs. To be honest, I've not been a big advocate behind the Roethlisberger signing since 2019. I was kind of opposed to that since then. I kind of saw the downward trend that he was heading to. I think it was one of those things where Steelers were kind of caught between two situations there, and they decided to bring him back for the remainder of his career, and it just didn't really pan out. Not that it was all Ben's fault. Our offensive line really struggled. I think neglecting the trenches over the last decade on both sides of the football has really affected this football team. And we're hoping for better results moving forward.
I think they were caught with their hands down when it came to the offensive line. I mean, losing Pouncey, then L moving on. And I think they were pretty much secure in letting L walk away, but losing Pouncey, L, and then losing to Castro, that was definitely a blow to them. You think DeCastro will come back and give it a shot this year? I mean, he's only going to be 33 years old. Are you hearing any rumblings?
I have not at all. My guess is that he's done for good. But you never know. We've seen crazier things happen, but I don't think he was coming back.
He was such a mainstay for so long at that position. He's probably at the end of the day never going to get what he deserves in terms of accolades.
Probably not. He probably needed a few more years in the NFL, to be honest. And it took Faneca as long as he did. So I think that DeCastro, he's probably going to fall short of the Hall. He was a great player for us. But yes, in terms of a comeback, like we've already seen, I don't know if you've seen pictures of Marquise Pouncey, but he has really thinned down already. And that's kind of the case with a lot of these offensive linemen after they retire. So to get back in football shape a few years later, I think would be very difficult at this point.
I want to pick your brain a little bit here and get your feelings on this, because I struggle with this. The Stephon Tuitt situation for the Steelers, I think it's very impactful. It's a lot more impactful than the way the Steelers do business. They would never tip their hand. But as a fan, and knowing fully well that they run that organization like a business, but a family-owned business, what's your feelings about the way the Tuitt situation is?
That is such a tricky situation, and one that I don't know if anybody has a great answer for. I think Stephon Tuitt, I said this before he missed this previous season. I really believe he was a top 4 player on the entire roster, and his impact obviously could be felt without him. The Steelers had, I believe, a top 6 defense in each of the previous 3 years. And then we go from that to dead last in rushing in both yards allowed and yards per attempt surrendered this past year. That's a huge, huge difference. I know that Tyson Alulu also missed 15 games last year. That contributes to it. Alulu is more of a part-time player, played 42 to 46% of snaps, I believe. But I mean, Tuitt really is a fantastic player for the Steelers when he's healthy. He was coming off of the best year of his career, finally healthy for the full time. I think he missed one game, but it was only due to resting just before the playoffs. And so not having him was huge. In terms of the situation, it'll be really interesting to see what the Steelers decide last year. I know it was a combination of the loss of his brother and dealing with a lingering knee issue that apparently went on longer than people thought it was going to. We believe that he's healthy now at this point. There's been whispers that he's wanting to come back to the Steelers and play football this year. And so we'll see which direction they go. I think he's better than any of the options that are out there in free agency. I think it's something that the Steelers should absolutely get done if Tuitt is willing to come back and get back in football shape and help contribute and make this team successful on defense again.
When do you think they should put a deadline on him, letting them know? Because, we're going to be coming up to the time where they've got to make some decisions with the draft and things of that nature. You got a couple of really good guys coming out of Georgia that could be impactful. I know that, I like that Alualu's planning on coming back. I love the Adams kid that they re-signed. I think he is maybe the future there after next year when, probably Alualu hangs it up. But you're going to need that other tackle. And let's face it, how much longer can Cam Hayward play at the level he's playing at? I mean, I'm hoping at least a few more years, but he is, 32 years old?
Yeah, he's getting up there now. And so we can't expect Cam to keep playing at the amazing level that he's played at for so long. For my money, he's probably behind only Aaron Donald still these last 2 years as one of the best interior defenders in the NFL. So the deadline for Tuitt, I mean, I think that came and passed already. I think it was March 14th when the legal tampering period opened up. I think that ideally you would like to have that decision made by that point. And then, okay, do we need to really be targeting a free agent hard? Or is Tuitt coming back and playing football for us? I mean, Fletcher Cox was briefly on the market there. And so there were some options, and there still are a few. And maybe the Steelers have a much better idea of what the media does right now. But I have written about that. I really like to have that decision made over a week ago about Tuitt's return. And then as far as Alulu goes, I think that Alulu could be a serviceable player for them again this year, but we got to consider that he's probably not going to be the same player he was either. He missed 15 games, landed on IR last year with the ankle injury. And he's going to be 35 years old this year too. And so I don't think we can expect a lot from him. I think it's a win if he offers some help in run defense and plays 35 to 40% of snaps for us this year and can stay on the football field. But they absolutely need another defensive tackle. I love the guys from Georgia this year, both Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt. I think that Jordan Davis is a much better fit for what the Steelers need. A guy that can play 5 technique, 1 technique, and move him across the defensive line. Whereas I think Wyatt is much more of the pigeonholed into being probably a 3 technique that's going to knife in the backfield and try to make plays as a pass rusher. He's a little bit older than Davis. I still like him a lot. I don't know if he's the best value there at 24, but Jordan Davis would be a slam dunk pick. I just don't envision him being there at pick 20.
Do you think the Steelers should take a flyer on Fletcher Cox, maybe bring him in for a workout?
Yeah, absolutely. But last I saw that the Eagles retain him.
They had cut him loose. Did they re-sign him?
I thought that the Eagles were getting him back. I could be wrong, but
okay. I didn't read anything today. I did not read anything today about it, but I would like to see that happen. I agree with you though. I mean, a decision needs to be made onto it, and that's bothered me. I get the mental health piece of it, but at some point we all have to strap it up and move forward. There's just you can't go back in time and change the way things happen. So if that's where he is, he needs to let them know. They've got a few agents, free agents left that they potentially could re-sign. Edmonds being one of them glaringly. Who would you re-sign that's left and available for them on that roster?
Out of the remaining names?
Yeah.
Probably just Edmonds, honestly. I think that the biggest goal for me of the players to retain this year was Akella Witherspoon. I thought from the beginning he is significantly more valuable, what he brings to the table, than Juju Smith-Schuster. I know that he's a fan favorite and a lot of fans are sad to see him go, but I really think that slot role can be replaced much, much easier, especially considering the efficiency that we saw from Juju the last year. Not all his fault. A lot of wide receiver plays, it's tied to your quarterback play as well. And so that efficiency has certainly dipped with an aging Ben. And I think Juju could have bounced back a little bit this year, but Witherspoon was the big one. I really wanted to get him done. There's just not a lot of good cornerbacks out there on the market. I think he checks all the boxes and what you want for potentially your cornerback 1 on the team. And I think he's a solid starter. I think he's been that for 2 years, one with the Steelers, one with the 49ers. He's athletic. He's long. He's got ball skills. He's not a great tackler, but I can live with one bad tackling football player on defense if it means it gives me a great cover guy. So I was really glad when they brought him back.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I like the signing of Levi Wallace. I think he's going to bring a dynamic to that team. He's got a winning attitude after playing up there in Buffalo the last couple of years that will continue with the Steelers, to be honest with you. Did you like the Miles Jack signing?
I got to be honest, I wasn't as big on the Jack signing as what most Steeler fans were that I saw. I know that Steelers Twitter was kind of going crazy over him. And I think that Jack has been a good player overall in his career, but these last 3 years, he hasn't quite been the same. I know PFF, he graded out very poorly for them last year. And I think the tape kind of backs that up. If you go and put on some tape from Miles Jack last year, he didn't look quite as fast and explosive as he normally does. He struggled in coverage. He got washed against the run. And I'm not saying that he was Devin Bush bad last year, but the results weren't great. And so I'm hoping that a fresh start can kind of revamp his career a little bit. Steelers get some of their defensive linemen back. I really feel like Jack and Bush are the type of linebackers who really, really could benefit from being freed up by the guys in front of them doing their job. The Steelers didn't have the luxury of doing that last year, and neither did Jacksonville. And so Jack and Bush both struggled for a lot of the same reasons. And so I hope we see an improvement from both of those guys this year. And I think if Jack can return to form, then it's a solid signing. And I think it's a low risk signing the way they structured the money. But you got to remember too, coming into the draft, he had a degenerative knee issue. And there were some that said, some team doctors that said that his knee is a ticking time bomb and that he's just not going to last. And you have to wonder if that is factored into his play these last couple of years as well.
We'll find out really quick because, like you said, the line in front of him should be better this year. But if it's not, can he step his game up and make them look a little bit better, make some more of those tackles that weren't being made last year? As far as Devin Bush goes, I'm personally not as down on him as others are. When you blow your knee out like that kid did, I think that last year he was kind of rushed back into it. He may not have been prepared for it. Going throughout the season. Now, in terms of sticking his nose in there and being aggressive, I mean, that could be a little bit souring, but I didn't expect him to make those plays like he did as a rookie or even at the start of last year until he got hurt. I mean, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that I mean, Bush obviously didn't have a good season last year, but he does get a bit of a pass coming off of the torn ACL. And we've seen historically that is not an easy injury to come back from. And I can't think of many linebackers who've had a ton of success after coming back from an ACL tear. I would expect Bush to be better this year, obviously. And I think that the defensive line obviously played a huge factor in that, the loss of Tuitt and Alualu, and even missing Carlos Davis. And so they were banged up all along the defensive line. And so I think Bush certainly benefits from working in space. But I agree that he just didn't have the urgency last year as well. You can kind of tell he was a little bit timid. He wasn't attacking the play. He was making the tackles 8 to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. Not exactly what you want to see, but also not unsurprising either for a linebacker coming off of an ACL tear. So I'm hoping that we see some of that aggression back, some of that physicality that drew the Steelers to him in the first place this year.
I'd like to see them bring in some coaching interns or whatever they call those guys, some former players who bring that old school Steeler mentality back to the field. Now I know Olszewski coaches the inside backers, but I think they just need more of that. They seem to have lost that Steeler mentality in a lot of ways. And that's kind of troubling after watching them for the last, 40 some years. Okay. So we filled a bunch of spots on this team, but I still think that receiving core is a little shallow. You lost Ray, which to me, okay, see you, Ray. That's just my opinion, obviously. But Ray's gone. James Washington is gone, who I don't feel like was given a real fair shot with this team. And Juju leaves. Is there anybody sitting out there right now that you think that they could sign at one of those cap-friendly numbers that would help this team right out of the gates starting in the season?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to lose 3 receivers, no matter who they are on any team, and do very little to replace them. Steelers they found their punt returner in free agency in Gunner, but I feel like he doesn't offer much in the receiving game. His 9 receptions over 3 years. He's not really going to be a receiver for you. That's not really his thing. So I actually wrote an article on this just today. It'll come out soon, but I was talking about the same exact topic. And I really think the Steelers would be wise to target a slot receiver specifically, because you are losing Juju and McLeod this year, and you really don't have another guy that can fill that role. And the reason why I kind of want them to go after a slot receiver is I feel like it'll give them more flexibility in the draft. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into drafting a guy like, say, a Sky Moore, who would work best from the slot. You can then go and get a George Pickens or a Christian Watson or one of these other talented receivers we have out there. It gives you more flexibility that you can go with an outside receiver, an inside receiver. So I think that filling that slot role is really the next key thing that I think Kevin Colbert needs to do in free agency. There's some options out there in Jarvis Landry, Jamison Crowder, Cole Beasley. Not anybody that's going to be probably more than a 1 or 2 year stopgap player, but guys with experience, guys that are chains movers, that can definitely jump in and be a veteran presence in the wide receiver room and help move the chains for you. And so I feel like you really should shore up that slot position prior to April. And then I think we're sitting pretty that on day 2 of the draft rolls around and we've liked the value at receiver there, and Steelers can jump on a receiver. It doesn't have to be one that fits the specific role.
Yeah, they do such a great job of drafting receivers even later than that I have all the confidence in the world in getting a guy like that. But I think you need to have somebody already slotted in since you're down 3 receivers. How about at the safety spot? I mean, if you don't ink Edmonds, there's all this talk about Honey Badger, and by the time this airs, which is going to be in just a little bit, but who would you put there? Like, is it better to bring Edmonds back, or do you go after a guy like Honey Badger? Imagine him with Fitzpatrick back there. I mean, let's face it, the AFC North is going to be somewhat of a difficult division going forward with Deshaun Watson, tentatively Deshaun Watson, we'll say, Lamar Jackson, and he's going to have something to prove, and Burrow, who's getting his offensive line strengthened up in front of him. It's just going to make him more dangerous. So who would you stick at that safety?
Yeah, absolutely. The quarterbacks are going to be a nightmare for us for a while, unfortunately. And in terms of who offers the best for right here and now, I think that player is Tyrann Mathieu. I think that he's got a lot of experience, was an all-pro guy. He obviously can make plays better on the ball than what Edmonds can. So it's kind of just, what are the Steelers looking for? Are they looking for a safety that's going to really help their team right here, right now, in this next year or two, maybe 3 down the line? Or are they hoping for something more long-term? If this team tries to turn things around 4 or 5 years from now, potentially Edmonds could be a guy that gets a second, third contract for them. He just turned 25 years old in January. I think that he's improved a little bit every year. Obviously doesn't have the same ball skills as Tyrann Mathieu, but he's a very sound tackler. I think he does a lot of things for you. He can cover tight ends. And so it's kind of comes down to preference. Mathieu is the better player. He also be the more expensive player, and he's also significantly older as well. So it depends on what they want to do here or now. Honestly, if you're asking me, I don't think that going with Edmonds is a bad option, because I think Edmonds has come at a little bit of a discount price. He's been sitting on the market for a little while. The rest of the safeties have really dried up. I think Edmonds already having that continuity with Minkah Fitzpatrick is huge. And they have 2 years of experience next together. So you got a pair of 25-year-old safeties that I feel like can be around for a while if you decide to go that route. And if you're looking farther ahead into the future, if they don't decide to go with either, then I think you really have to put safety as a position that's on the map in the first 2 rounds, probably of the NFL draft. I would not rule out a guy like Lewis Cine of Georgia. I know a lot of people view him as more of a second round guy, much to the tune of like Terrell Edmonds coming out in 2018, probably a better prospect than that still. But he is a tools-based guy. He's an underclassman, and just going off of what Tomlin and Colbert normally do in the first round, he's a guy that just checks every box that they would look for. Big school, elite athletes. He's got the production. He's very physical. And so I would not be surprised to see that as kind of a low-key pick. And Dax Hill, kind of the same way, out of Michigan. He's another guy, a little bit better ball skills, I think. He can kind of cover the slot. Probably not as physical as what Lewis Cine is, but I think those are 2 guys that if the Steelers skip over Edmonds and Mathieu in free agency, and assuming that they don't get any other quality option, I think we've got to consider that safety could be in play in the first 2 rounds.
I would make that a priority if they don't, and I do agree with you. I think Edmonds has progressed slowly but surely. They invested so much in a guy that was a third round, really a third round grade. They invested a number 1 pick for him. And okay, I get it. The Steeler way, you bring them along slowly, all that kind of stuff, but they've got to address that now. And it just as much as the receiver spot, you got to make sure that that's secure with that quarterback crew that you're looking at. Speaking of quarterbacks, the Steelers go out and they get Trubisky. Okay. I want your feelings on that. And I want you to tell me if that's a long-term solution or what the long-term solution would be if it was you.
I don't think that Trubisky is a long-term solution, but having said that, I also don't think that he's a bad option right now either, as some would argue. I really never thought that the Steelers were realistically in play for a guy like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson, especially Watson, with the issues. I just didn't think that was something that the Rooneys would ever want to deal with. And when you have to combine that with the elite draft capital that you'd have to ship over there as well. So I didn't think that that was something that was realistically on the table. So outside of those 2 options, I think you can make a case that Trubisky might have been the 3rd best quarterback move from a team this free agency. And it's not that I'm that high on Trubisky. I just think it's such a low risk signing. The money was terrific for what they're getting in a starting quarterback. And I can assure you that he's going to be starting over Mason Rudolph in week 1. And so I think it was very low risk. At the same time, you got a guy with tools. You got a guy that's really, I've said all offseason, I think he's a perfect fit for Canada's offense. So we will see now that Canada's got his quarterback and they're giving him some offensive linemen, if Canada really is this guy for us, if he's going to be the coordinator that's going to be around for a while. But I was not opposed to the Trubisky signing. I think he's a stopgap player. It probably gives you a year or 2 as a starter until Steelers look for the next option, which could be in this draft or the following draft.
I mean, I'm excited to see what happens from that perspective. I know Pickett had his pro day and his hands are just a little bit bigger, aren't they?
Yes.
I mean, it's a catch-22 with him though, because if he goes to Pittsburgh and he's successful, they'll say, this is what should have happened with Marino. But if he comes to Pittsburgh and he doesn't take care of business, then it's going to be, we failed. We just took him because he was a hometown boy. I'm okay with Trubisky.
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think as a bridge quarterback for the price they paid for him, what he's going to be asked to do, let's face it, he's got Najee in the backfield. He's got Freiermuth as a steady. He's got Deontay Johnson. Now, if they can get another guy that they're secure with in terms of catching the ball out of the slot, he'll have some weapons around him. And they went out and they addressed the offensive line. And I think they'll continue to address it in free agency, potentially, as things roll along. And in the draft, I think they understood last year what their downfall was from my perspective. So let's look at the draft. What are you drafting? Like if you're Colbert and you're sitting there, what are you drafting?
Good question. Well, let me address this real quick too. I know you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to chime in anyway. James Daniels was my favorite offseason signing so far by a mile, I feel like, because I think that James Daniels was an excellent football player on a really bad Bears team that didn't really know what they were doing on offense. I think that Steeler fans are really going to come to like that signing a lot. But even with him and even with adding Mason Cole this year, I wasn't crazy about. I think the Steelers should absolutely target the trenches in the NFL draft. Now, whether they do that or not is an entirely different question. If there's a gun to my head right now, I think that the Steelers are going quarterback in the first round. And I don't love that. I'm not crazy about this year's quarterback class. I think a guy like Malik Willis has some crazy good upside. But he's also a major risk too. I think he's the prototypical boomer bust prospect. And not only that, but I think you almost certainly have to move up for him at this point. You might even have to get as high as the 7th or 8th overall pick to land a guy like that. And right. I think Kenny Pickett is kind of in a similar way as well. I know there's teams interested in him. I would kind of be surprised if Pickett fell to 20. And I think he's a guy that the Steelers might have to move up a little bit for as well. So I think that quarterback is probably still the top position on Pittsburgh's radar. It just makes so much sense with Ben gone. Trubisky probably viewed as just a stopgap guy. Colbert's being in his last season. I mean, it feels very Ozzie Newsome-esque with the Ravens, where you kind of want to go out finding that next guy. And I can certainly see the Steelers drafting a quarterback. I wouldn't rule out Sam Howell in the first round either. This is a guy I've been talking about for a while now. It doesn't, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what the fans' opinions are of Howell. I know he took a step back this year as a junior, but if you're talking about a box checker, that is Howell. I mean, apart from missing their 6'3" or taller threshold, he checks every other box in terms of he's an athlete. He's got a good arm. He's an underclassman. He's very young. He's got 3 years of very good production. He was a high recruit coming out. All the things that the Steelers look for. He's from a Power 5 conference. I feel like he's very much got to be on the Steelers' radar, possibly even inside the top 5 or 3 players that they would consider drafting at pick 20. So
can I make a sneaky pick? I'm going to make a sneaky pick and tell you they grab him in the second round.
In the second round?
Yeah,
I keep saying a little bit. Yeah, I think that I can get on board with that much more. At the same time, my philosophy when it comes to the quarterback position, if you really believe that you are getting an elite level talent in the draft, then it should be a guy that you're comfortable trading a first round pick up for, right? But I can understand that there's not going to be every draft like that. And so assuming that the Steelers, if they drafted Howell in the second round, assuming that they would be able to move on in a year or two, not having invested so much, I'd be completely on board with that. What scares me is thinking that the Steelers would draft Howell in the second. And if he doesn't pan out, are the Steelers going to give this guy 4 or 5 years anyway, even if fans at home can tell that he's not it? That's what worries me a little bit with the front office and kind of just what we've seen in the past. Like they gave Jarvis Jones 4 years as starter, Artie Burns 3 years. And so they don't easily give up on investments that they've made. And so I hope the quarterback that they take is good. Obviously, if they drafting one in the second round kind of sounds ideal this year, because I'm probably going to have 5 quarterbacks with a second round grade and not enough separating them all to jump up and use elite draft capital to go get a guy that I like maybe slightly better. And I want to have a situation where we can kind of see what we have with a quarterback behind Trubisky and Canada's offense, one like Howell, who would fit the system very well, and then see in a year or two, is this a guy we need to move on from? So yeah, I kind of like your thought process there in round 2.
How about a guy like Carson Strong?
Yeah, you came to the wrong person when you're talking about Carson Strong.
Okay.
And I get what's to like about him. I think he is your your big traditional pocket passing quarterback. There are a few things that really scare me about him. The first thing is the knee injury. I think he is very, very clunky in his movements. I think that shows up on tape. I think we saw that the Senior Bowl and at the Combine. I don't think his arm is as elite as everyone wants to make it out to be. I think part of the reason why his arm maybe looked a little bit better than he did, he was playing in Nevada against some pretty poor defenses, a pretty rough schedule. I think that he is a good pocket passer, but almost anymore, in my mind at least, I think a trait that is almost essential for an NFL quarterback is having the ability to extend the play. And that is something that I don't believe that Carson Strong will ever have. And that really scares me with him, that he's going to be very limited, especially if you put him behind a Steelers offensive line that really struggled last year, should be improved, but really struggled. I would worry about how Carson Strong turns out in Pittsburgh. I think that there are a few teams that could get by with a quarterback like him and maybe turn out to be a very solid football player, but I would probably avoid him. He's going to be my 6th quarterback on my draft board this year.
So in terms of Malik Willis, let me tell you how I view him. Just from my perspective, I kind of feel like he's going to be like a Vince Young kind of guy. That's what I see. He may not be as bad as the guy. He may not be as bad as the guy that the Raiders took. I'm drawing a blank on his name. He played at LSU. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name.
Jamarcus Russell.
Yeah, Jamarcus Russell. He was just so bad. But I can see Willis being more like a Vince Young kind of guy who hangs around the league for 3-5 years, whatever. He's not going to be the Lamar Jackson guy from the perspective that he's going to rush like Lamar Jackson, because I don't think he'll get into that type of situation. Let's face it, the Ravens have created an offense that's dictated to Lamar Jackson's strength. It's not throwing the ball, it's running the ball. And when everybody says the Ravens are a top rushing team every year, if you subtract 1,200 yards from Lamar Jackson's rushing total, what do you have? You have a middle of the pack team running the ball. And quite frankly, I don't want my quarterback carrying the ball for 1,200 yards. I don't know about you. I know Coach Tomlin said he wants a guy who has mobility, and I'm damn sure he did not mean a 1,200-yard rusher in his quarterback. So it's going to be interesting to see with Willis. Now that Marcus Mariota has gone to Atlanta and Ryan is up in Indianapolis, I don't think that's the end of the dominoes to fall yet. I do think you'll see Garoppolo get moved. I'm just not, over the course of the next 6 weeks to 2 months, I think there's going to be a lot more changes. So I will sit with bated breath as we get towards the draft. If I had to ask you to put in pencil who were going to be the Steelers' 3 quarterbacks on the roster, and you can just say a rookie from this perspective, who are the Steelers' 3 quarterbacks that are going to be on the roster when they kick off in September? Who would you say besides Trubisky?
Sure. Then I would, if that's what we're going with, I would say Trubisky, Mason Rudolph, and I would say a rookie as that 3rd guy who is going to sit and learn. I still think that's their most likely pick this year. If they don't draft a rookie, I think Haskins will take that 3rd spot. If not, Haskins gets moved back down. And so I'll say a rookie replaces Haskins.
Steelers did some, I know you talked a little bit about coaching there as you were throwing some thoughts out. Steelers did some movements. They replaced the defensive coordinator. They hired from, they promoted from within with Austin. They brought in a new wide receivers coach, which it was really odd the way they did that thing. Nobody even realized, okay, his contract's up, we're moving on from him. And all of a sudden they're announcing a new receivers coach. They brought in a new O-line coach from both of those guys are from Carolina, the receivers and the O-line coach, and their offense was pretty bad. And then they have the gem of all gems. They go ahead and they grab Brian Flores, and I will give you my thoughts on that in just a little bit. But what are your impressions of the changes that they made?
I would say interesting is a good word to describe them as well. Coming from Carolina, I don't know. I hope that they're better than they played the last few years, but getting Frisman Jackson as their wide receiver coach, Pat Myers, their offensive line coach. I think if you go back a few years earlier, then these guys have had some success in the past. Frisman Jackson's been a coach for 14 years in college football in the NFL, and Meyer for 20 years. I think Meyer did a good job when he was in Los Angeles coaching the Chargers. But these last few years really haven't been kind to either one of them. And so I'm interested to see how those signings turn out. In terms of Brian Flores, I think Flores is still a very good coach who is going to get another opportunity to be a head coach in the NFL. And so that one was pretty easy, I feel like, to bring him in. I think he's going to offer this team a lot, maybe even take over at some point down the stretch as defensive coordinator. I'm sure he will look again the next year or two, and there'll be teams that are wanting to interview him for some outside hires. So I don't think the moves were necessarily bad overall. I think some things needed to be done. The offensive line did really struggle. And we'll see what these guys have. We'll see what they bring to the table. But I just, in a whole, I really have not been impressed with what they've offered their respective teams in terms of the receiver coach and the offensive line coach these past couple of years.
I often wonder about what Tomlin does in terms of his assistant coaching hirings. It always seems like there is a tie into him in some way, shape, or form with guys he brings in. And I personally struggle with that because I want to see them hire the best candidate. Now, I know you hear oftentimes that the Steelers are one of the teams that pays their assistants the lowest amount of money. Fine, whatever. But still, I think he needs to go outside the box and feel more comfortable with bringing in some people who challenge him sometimes. I mean, I feel like some of these guys don't challenge his decision-making. Otherwise, we wouldn't see some of the things that have been happening the last 16 years continue to happen, and I'm not bashing Tomlin. Trust me. I'm not a huge fan, but I think he's a great guy. And I think he's great for the organization. My thoughts on Brian Flores. Tomlin has 2 years left on his deal after this year?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, 2 years. I think Brian Flores steps into that position in 2 years, and Tomlin
walks away. That's a good prediction.
That's my thoughts. I sense that. I feel that from this organization. They went out and got another strong Tomlin-like person who is more. I think he's more adapt to what his players need currently, and I don't think Tomlin is adapt to that. So just my thoughts on it. Mm-hmm. All right. So you're the GM. You're looking for the GM. Your thoughts on how this thing is transpiring, because they have interviewed, they've interviewed so many people. I mean, it's been a turnstile there. Who's going to get this thing at the end of the day? Is it going to stay in-house and get split? Because that was my prediction. It's going to stay in-house and get split. Or are they going to go outside of the organization? Is Louis Riddick going to get a shot? Or, what do you think?
Well, if the Steelers don't find the right GM, it's not going to be for lack of effort. They've certainly done their homework this offseason. Way more candidates interviewed for the position than what I would have anticipated. I would have thought they would have done a few outside candidate interviews. At the end of the day, I do believe it comes down to someone within the organization who they feel really comfortable with and who has been here for a long time. I think because Brandon Hunt manages more of the scouting, I think that they're going to end up going with him ultimately, just putting him in charge of the draft and all that kind of stuff. And they'll more or less leave Omar Khan in the position that he's been. So my prediction would be Brandon Hunt, if I had to guess right now, for the Steelers. And I'm thinking that they do go in-house still, like they often do.
I mean, and it's okay. I'm fine with that. Hunt has done a nice job of bringing in some quality guys from a scouting standpoint. It's all about the development now, which leads back to the coaching, which leads back to my thoughts on Tomlin getting outside of the box and feeling a little uncomfortable with people he brings in, but having some trust in his own judgment. Hey, Tommy, this has been so awesome, but we got one final segment I'd like to do. We just got to know. I value your opinion on this. I value the facts that you gather together. I value your writing because I read it. To you, the 5 most important players for the future of the Steelers, and you could start with the least to most, starting right now, 2022.
Least to most. All right, let me think about this backwards here for a second. Okay, number 5. Now you caught me off guard here. Now I'm trying to go reverse order here. So, okay, I know 1, I know what 2. Let's start with Pat Freiermuth at number 5. I know that seems a little bit premature. I think Pat's going to be a guy he's a 10-year tight end for the Steelers as a starter. I think he's very solid, and already as a rookie, he was blocking on the move, catching in traffic. He's going to be a red zone nightmare. And so let's go ahead and slot Pat in at number 5. Oh, so we're talking about moving forward, right? Are we talking about for the future? That's what you said. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we have Pat number 5. Whew, this gets tricky here. I know my 3 through 1. So let's say, man, this is interesting.
Anyone on those lines need to be there to anchor?
Yeah. The problem is with their offensive linemen, they're all a little bit older, right? So I would say Stephon Tuitt still, if he came back, I mean, he was what, 28 years old still. 28. And so that's, I mean, you got a lot of years left in the tank. I mean, if you remember Cam Hayward, his career didn't really kick off till he was 27, 28 years old from actually being a Pro Bowl, all pro caliber player. So I think if Tuitt comes back, I would slot Tuitt there. If Tuitt doesn't come back to the Steelers, then what I'd maybe do is bump Freiermuth up 1. And man, I might put a Keller Witherspoon. Honestly, I know that everybody's going to want Najee in there. If you read my stuff, you know how I feel about running backs. I think they're very dependent on the guys in front of them. And this isn't to say that Najee's not a great football player, because I think that he is very talented. I think he has a chance to be one of the best running backs in the NFL. And I think he could be there already, but I just don't think we're looking at the future as a whole. I don't think Najee's going to be as valuable. There's going to be a lot of tread wore off. I think he's going to be a guy that probably gets 1 contract and maybe 5th-year option, maybe a franchise tag, kind of to the tune of Le'Veon Bell. So we're looking big picture here. Then if not to it, I would say bump up Freiermuth and maybe even put Witherspoon there, because the value of a number 1 quarterback is high. And so I think that can change within the next draft or 2, but I might even put Witherspoon up there. And I think part of it honestly has to do with a little bit of a talent deficiency, if you will, on the roster right now, and not really having a lot of these cornerstone guys. And maybe James Daniels can be one of those guys. I don't value guards as highly as I do offensive tackles. I think they're a little bit easier to replace, but Daniels is a very good football player. I kind of expect him to be Steelers' best offensive lineman this year. But I would slot Witherspoon in there if Tuitt doesn't come back and play football. At number 3, I would go with Deontay Johnson. They've got an X receiver. They've got a pretty good one. He's going to be a guy. He's going to get his money. I'm pretty confident in that, even with Christian Kirk wrecking the wide receiver market here a little bit. Johnson's a guy that can get open. He did much better catching the football last year, albeit most of his catches came within 10 yards in the line of scrimmage, because that's where Ben was comfortable throwing. But I do think that Johnson is very good before the catch. I think he's solid after the catch, elusive, making guys miss. He really has a hard time being pressed because he's just so slippery. And so I think good X receivers are hard to come by. I would slot Johnson in there as the 3rd most valuable. For number 2, we're going to go with Minka, who is going to get his money here soon. I think that you can argue the value in free safeties in today's NFL has diminished a little bit. There's it's a game built around the short passing game. And so I think you can argue that it's kind of reversed, and now strong safeties are more valuable, that play up at the line of scrimmage and are making plays near the football. But I would still put Fitzpatrick as the 2nd most valuable part of the team, two-time All-Pro by the age of 24. I think he's going to have a great NFL career that could potentially finish with a Hall of Fame. Normally the 4 first-team All-Pro mark is that benchmark you want to reach, and I think he's well on his way. And I think he still has yet to see some of his best football. So I would put him number 2. And then number 1 would obviously be TJ Watt. If I could, I'd put him 1, 2, and 3. I think he's that valuable. He's more valuable than the next 2 or 3 guys combined, to be honest. I don't remember the last time that the Steelers have had a defensive player quite this dominant. I don't think that his statistical production is flukish. You can argue about his pass rush win rate, efficiency, whatever. He was banged up 5 times last year and still came into the game, into football games. He missed a total of 3 games or so. When you add up the times he's left in the entire second half, and despite all of that, he just makes plays. He gets the big forced fumble in the 4th quarter. Without him, I think the Steelers are several wins worse. And I don't think they make the playoffs. I think he's that big of a difference maker on defense that he is the single most valuable asset that this organization has. And I think it's going to be that way for several years.
I was sitting in the Ravens stadium for Ben's last game, and TJ should have definitely been credited with a sack, that first one. That was a pass play. They had 5 wide. He wasn't running the ball. He wasn't doing anything but passing it. That's his fault for dropping the damn ball. TJ should have been given a sack and broke that record. But, that's just the NFL with the Steelers. whatever,
Mhm.
Hey, Tommy, tell us where we can follow you on social media and any websites.
All right. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi, Jaggi. You can follow us on Facebook at Still Curtain Facebook page. And you can follow us along with our content on stillcurtain.com.
Excellent. It's been fantastic talking to you. As a Steeler fan, again, I highly recommend people go out and read Tommy's stuff and follow him on Twitter. He seems to have a little tidbit here and there that he grabs before a lot of other people in his predictions. To be quite honest with you, I found them to be pretty much on point. So thanks again for your time. I'm going to let you get back to those 5 kids now.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me today.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Hey, thanks once again to Tommy Jaggi for joining us on the Original Sports Podcast with Mark Maradei. Connect with us here by checking out our website, apps, and much more. Our website is originalsportspodcast.com. Like our Facebook page, join our conversation on Twitter, and reach out to us on Snapchat. All of that, you can find us at OSP with MM. And you can also follow us on Instagram. You can watch our TikToks and subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of those are Original Sports Podcast. Hey, feel free to let us know if you have any comments, questions, suggestions for future guests by emailing us at originalsportspodcast@gmail.com. I'd like to thank our audio engineer, Sean Ankoviak. I'd like to thank our voice intro, which is done by Matt Noble. Our intro and outro music provided by Ryan Benton and Preston Harper. Our social media manager, Will Franciscus, and our webmaster, Terry Maradei. Hey, join us each week to experience the O on the Original Sports Podcast.